There are plenty of DACs and amps in the market. You could go crazy looking for something to fit into your system, not to mention the confusion many new audiophiles must feel when they first think about buying DACs and amps. While there are many DACs and amps which cost well over a few $100s, some companies like Fosi Audio provide lots of value for much cheaper. Today, we're going to take a look at the Fosi DS1, an $80 dongle DAC amp, and the SK2, a $100 desktop DAC amp. Fosi Audio sent me both products to review. Let's see what they have to offer. The DS1 uses the ES9038Q2M DAC chipset, which I have to emphasize was not too long ago one of the top-of-the-line DAC chipsets from ESS, and plopped into DACs costing $1,000 or well more than that. Here, in the DS1, this DAC chip supports all forms of PCM up to the highest 32-bit audio and also caters to DSD up to 512. But there's no MQA support if that matters to some of you. The DS1 has both 3.5mm and balanced 4.4mm headphone outputs and a USB-C connection. Fosi says that through the single-ended we should get a maximum of 120 milliwatts and through balanced 220 milliwatts, both measured at 32 ohms impedance. Fosi claims that the DS1 is best used with headphones and IEMs up to 300 ohms, which of course includes a huge number of dynamic driver options. The SK2 also uses the 9038Q2M chip and also tosses in some op-amps for extra measure. Curiously, the SK2 audio resolution support is not the same as that of the DS1. The SK2 supports 32-bit PCM up to 384 kHz, while the DS1 reaches 768 kHz, but good luck finding music that caters to either of those. Also, the SK2 will render up to DSD 256, not the 512 of the DS1. Just like with the DS1, the SK2 has both 3.5mm and 4.4mm headphone outputs, but the SK2 has both USB-C and optical inputs and an auxiliary output. Fosi's website says that the SK2 can be paired with passive speakers, but I seriously doubt that. I think that is merely a typo. There's a slight bit of discrepancy about the power output numbers on the SK2, depending on the Fosi website and the Fosi manual. On the website, they say that you get up to 1100 milliwatts at 32 ohms through balanced output on high gain. The manual, on the other hand, says 1062 milliwatts under the same conditions. I would not call that a rounding error. Once again, just as with the DS1, the SK2 is supposedly good for headphones up to 300 ohms. One major distinction here is that with the SK2, you should more easily be able to power planar magnetic headphones. As for build, the DS1 seems like any other USB drive-shaped DAC amp, but it is much, much heavier than any other similarly sized product I've ever reviewed. This is a very hefty portable DAC amp, built entirely of metal. There are two buttons on the side to control volume. Clicking both at once will switch between low and high gain. I appreciate the solid build quality, but I think that cuts against this being a portable product. The sharp edges and heavy weight can pose quite a problem for anything the DS1 is attached to. Phone and tablet screens are particularly susceptible to scratches if this thing were to hit. I'm confident that such a heavy device was not necessary. In the past, I've made similar observations about competitor products, but this is the very first time I've come across something this hefty, and now my concern is even more heightened. Just keep this in mind if you end up buying this product. The SK2 is a wild departure from the DS1. Actually, the SK2 looks like the Micro Origin, but much larger. The SK2 is built entirely of metal and does feel sturdy. There's a large control knob on the top. This controls volume both for headphone outputs and the auxiliary out. Clicking the knob will play and pause music depending on your device and application. Long pressing will also power the SK2 on and off. The SK2 has amplification independent of your connected device, so when you adjust volume, you're not adjusting system volume on your PC or Mac, for example. The top plate houses indicators for gain, input, and sample rates. The gain button will swap between low and high. The mode button will let you select between the input options. Ultimately, both products are impressive in their own ways. The DS1 packs quite a punch in power and audio support. The SK2 offers a surprising amount of power and an interesting mix of connectivity. However, there is a caveat about the SK2. ASR reviewed this product, and while they gave a positive review, their measurements show something very different from what Fosi claims about their power output. As I mentioned before, Fosi says that through balanced output at 32 ohms and high gain, we should expect something around 1100 milliwatts. But ASR measured 595 milliwatts at 33 ohms on high gain through balance, and that is a huge discrepancy. Unfortunately, ASR rarely, if ever, discusses such variances between their measurements and a company's promised specifications. Frankly, I don't know if ASR's near 500 milliwatt difference is due to testing parameters or if Fosi is just giving us false numbers, but this is something to keep in mind for sure. For every DAC or amp review, I conduct the same test. Simply listening and making judgment calls is not enough, as subjective impressions alone can be incredibly misleading. On the other hand, looking just at measurements can also give a false sense of knowledge when you have not actually used the device. I combine measurements, when available, with subjective listening impressions, but I make my listening tests as repeatable and science-backed as I can. This is why I rigorously conduct A/B comparisons, explain what I did, and encourage others to do the same. To that end, I tested the DS1 and SK2 in multiple phases. In Phase 1, I used the DS1 and SK2 as my go-to devices for several weeks. I plugged them into my desktop, laptop, iPad, and iPhone along with my LG V30 and Windows computers. I listened to high-resolution lossless files, streamed lossy content, and consumed a variety of content. I used numerous headphones and IEMs through both the balanced and single-ended outputs. The idea in this phase was to determine if the devices exhibited any odd behavior, incompatibility, or defects through regular use. In Phase 2, I compared the DS1 and SK2 against some alternatives. This included the Low 2PA S1, CDA M1P, EcoZerta ITM03, Audeze B4, Xduo XD05, Balance 2, Matrix Mini I Pro 3, and of course, the Micro Origin. I plugged each device into my Windows and Mac systems and sent signal to two at once using Voicemeeter Banana on Windows and multi-output device on Mac. I plugged the single-ended output into a passive A/B switch and used various headphones and IEMs to conduct numerous hours-long comparisons over several days. I tried to volume match using the built-in amps of the devices when available and through system volume controls. And by the way, just as a side note, some people believe that passive A/B switches somehow change the sound quality of the various products that are connected to them. That's not a thing. It doesn't happen. It's already been tested. The goal in this particular Phase 2 was to determine if the Fosi products presented an obviously different sound from the competitors. And of course, I compared the DS1 and the SK2 against each other in their own test as well. Finally, in Phase 3, I plugged low and high impedance headphones into the DS1 and SK2 to figure out if the devices could drive them. I used dynamic and planar headphones and IEMs for this portion of the test. Throughout this process, I used many headphones and IEMs. This includes the Focal Elex, Beyerdynamic DT880, Avantone Planar, audeze LCD2 Classic, the LCD1, the LCD4, Allo S5X, Moondrop Aria, Tin Hi-Fi T2, 7Hz Timeless, Final Audio B2, and some others. I strongly encourage people to conduct these types of true volume-matched A/B tests at home. For about $25, you can find the necessary off-the-shelf components to create your own test bench. If you want less reviewer and fanboy BS, I think you need to establish a reliable, repeatable testing method that mitigates against audiophile nonsense. Let's dive into the results of the tests. In Phase 1, I used the DS1 and SK2 as my daily drivers. The goal again was to see if they exhibited any odd behavior. The simple answer is no, they did not. The DS1 functioned perfectly well with all my devices, Mac, Windows, Android, and iOS. I never encountered audible distortion or hiss or other issues. I never lost USB connection or had driver errors. All the sources immediately recognized the DS1, and the physical connection on the DS1's USB side was secure, even when tossed into a bag or in my pocket. However, as I said before, I was always very worried about the DS1 scratching my phone or tablet when either in my pocket or a bag. You could use some scotch tape to attach the DS1 to the back of your mobile device, which in the long run might actually be a good option in general. Luckily, the DS1 did not scratch any of my devices, though I was hyper vigilant about it. The SK2 similarly had no issues whatsoever connecting to any of my computers. I did not need to download additional drivers. The SK2's jump from low to high gain was not particularly noticeable with headphones, by the way. There was a bit more volume on high gain. Now, ASR did mention about the high gain button just rescaling the volume control, so the difference should not be apparent through A/B switching of this mode alone. The SK2 surprisingly also easily controlled playback on my audio software, Spotify, Amazon Music HD, and even audio and video playing on YouTube. Well done. In short, both the DS1 and SK2 perform perfectly fine in day-to-day usage. Now, onward to Phase 2, where I compared these devices against many other alternatives and of course against each other. I encourage all of you to invest $25 in creating your own test bench for these kinds of comparisons. You should do them and not rely on reviewer commentary. I posted a video a few years ago showing how you can assemble your own test kit with off-the-shelf components. Feel free to use someone else's setup if it works for you. The goal is to use a method that is repeatable and reliable. Do true A/B comparisons with a switchbox. Only when you conduct tests this way will you know if the hype behind DACs and amps and headphones is real. In the multitude of comparisons I have done in this manner, only very few times have I encountered an audible difference between DACs and amps. Sometimes it is through design, such as with the Bellari HA543. Sometimes it's because the device has harmonic distortion, such as with tube amps and DACs. But here, with the DS1 and SK2, when all settings are similar as possible, using A/B comparisons and repeated attempts, the conclusion is that these products sound neutral. They are neutral compared to each other and neutral compared to the alternatives here. In other words, there is absolutely no audible difference between either of the Fosi products and any of the other gear I compared against. Once again, modern DACs typically use the same components. These manufacturers bulk purchase DAC chipsets and throw them into their PCB designs. Their goal is to provide clean output, and not to somehow purposefully alter the signal so that you hear a different sound signature. Look, if they promise that on their website, then you should look out for it. But it's really odd that these companies don't actually say that. They don't market it, and nobody actually from their company proposes that. It's only audiophiles from a certain sector. If you think otherwise, then do a real A/B test with switchboxes, show your work, and post it. If it can be replicated and confirmed, then I'm all on board. Finally, let's quickly discuss Phase 3, where I used various headphones and IEMs to determine if the Fosi gear had difficulty driving them. Generally, no. Both the DS1 and SK2 had no problems at all powering any dynamic driver headphone or planar IEM. Even the 600 ohm Bare Dynamic T1 2nd Gen got plenty loud and seemed to perform as well on the Fosi products as my desktop units. The 600 ohm DT880, however, did not fare well, but that headphone needs high output impedance of about 100 ohms, as I discussed at length in a series of videos a few years ago. Now, on the other hand, planar headphones will play differently. The DS1 is simply not created for large planar headphones that require more than 300 milliwatts for peak performance. In my experience, both the DS1 and SK2 did quite well with the audeze LCD2, Avantone Planar, and hifi Manson Dara. However, if you have something that's very unique from the planar magnetic side that requires a lot more power, you can just dish out the DS1 as not compatible. But neither of these two products could really drive the Madhouse Argon either. The SK2 definitely made the Argon sound louder than the DS1, but I do not think that this headphone received optimum power for peak performance. But we are really talking about specialty headphones. The Argon is just one example, and it really isn't everyone's cup of tea and should not be seen as some kind of audiophile global standard. The vast majority of headphones and IEMs will perform perfectly well with either the DS1 or the SK2. I really wouldn't worry about it. But if you happen to be an individual who's purchased a very, very hard-to-drive headphone, you should probably look elsewhere. There is so much to like about this Fosi gear. I've owned some of their other stuff, and overall, I think this company provides good value. Here, with the DS1 and SK2, we get an interesting feature set for $100. Both are neutral and transparent. Both work out of the box with your sources. Both are built very well. But I do have one concern for each. The DS1 is just really bulky and heavy for portable use. If you like your phones and tablets scratch-free, you'll have to take some extra precautions with the DS1. And the SK2. I just cannot get over the power output variance. Maybe ASR's testing was wrong, maybe I'm looking at their results incorrectly, or maybe Fosi's numbers are not true. Assuming that ASR's number of nearly 600 milliwatts at peak is the true output, well, that's not exactly chicken feed either. That's still a powerful amp, but you could easily do better in terms of raw power output by spending another $25 on the shit Magni, though of course you'd have to add the additional cost of a standalone DAC. Look, my concern is that Fosi promises over 1 watt, and an independent measurement shows half that. That ain't good. Ultimately, this really just depends on what you need. If the issues I've mentioned don't matter to you, and you like everything else about either of these two products, then I think the DS1 and SK2 are quite good options for the money.